He punched her. In a police station. In front of everyone. A 60-year-old black woman. Calm. Dignified. Unarmed. What no one knew. She wasn't just a civilian. She was the newly appointed federal oversight officer sent to audit that very department. That punch didn't silence her. It sparked a reckoning that would burn through decades of corruption and bring an entire precinct to its knees. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the story. The sound didn't come from a gun, but it might as well have. It was a fist, flesh against flesh, knuckle against cheekbone, a crack that tore through the sterile air of the police station lobby like thunder. Heads turned. Conversations halted. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. It wasn't just the violence of the act that stopped everyone. It was who it landed on. Evelyn Hart didn't flinch. Not the way they expected. Not the way victims usually do. She stood there, a woman in her 60s with iron gray curls beneath a drenched navy hat, her coat still dripping from the rain, her expression unreadable. The blow had split her lip. A thin line of blood traced the corner of her mouth. But her eyes, sharp and steady, never left the man who hit her. Officer Troy Maddox. White, mid-40s, square jaw, temper as infamous as his so-called dedication. To most who wore the badge, he was the law. To others, especially the ones he stopped and silenced, he was the warning that justice came with conditions. And in that moment, surrounded by junior officers and blinking surveillance cameras, he had done what no training ever authorized. He struck a defenseless woman in front of the entire station. And he laughed. "You people never learn," he sneered, wiping his hand on his uniform like she were dirt. The room didn't move. Not yet. No one stepped between them. Not the sergeant at the desk. Not the rookie by the file cabinet. Not the lieutenant on her phone. Because something about the silence that followed felt like a cliff. Like if anyone spoke, the whole thing would collapse. Evelyn said nothing. She dabbed her lip with a handkerchief from her coat pocket, her movements calm, deliberate. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't break. That was what unnerved them the most. That a woman who looked like someone's grandmother, who spoke with soft authority and carried herself with grace, didn't crumble under the blow. She absorbed it, like it was nothing new. "Ma'am," someone finally said, a young officer with freckles and fear in his voice. "Do you need medical assistance?" Evelyn turned her gaze to him, and for a second, the kid looked like he wanted to disappear. Then, with a tone that didn't rise but resonated deep, she answered, "I need your department to remember who I am." Troy scoffed. "Lady, I don't care if you're the mayor's niece. You walk in here demanding answers like you run the place, you get put in your place." The words were like gasoline, and Evelyn, she was the match. She took one slow step forward, not toward him, but toward the wall behind him, lined with plaques, photographs, awards, a wall meant to honor history, legacy, authority. Her fingers brushed across one of the frames. Then she pulled it from the wall. She turned, holding it up. "You recognize this?" It was an old department photo, faded at the edges, black and white. A lineup of commissioners, chiefs, deputy heads. Near the center stood a young black woman in uniform, stern and poised. Evelyn pointed. That was me, 40 years ago, the first woman of color to hold rank in this precinct. And I didn't come here to ask questions. I came to audit you. The room shattered, not physically, but mentally. You could see the shift in every officer's posture. Shock, guilt. A few backed away from Troy, subtly. A few looked down at their feet. But all of them saw it. He hadn't just hit a woman. He'd assaulted the former deputy commissioner of internal affairs. Troy's mouth opened, but no words came. Evelyn set the frame down on the nearest desk. You remember my name now, Officer Maddox? Or do I need to remind you in front of a federal panel? No one breathed. What followed wasn't screaming. It wasn't rage. It was order. Controlled. Precise. Evelyn walked to the desk, pulled out her credentials from her satchel, and placed them on the counter. One badge. One letter from the Office of Inspector General. Signed and stamped. As of this moment, she said, her voice like cold iron, this department is under formal review. Every arrest, every citation, every complaint filed in the last 10 years. I hope you all have copies, because what Officer Maddox did just became Exhibit A. That was when people moved. Phones rang. A call was made to the mayor's office. The captain was summoned. Troy was no longer laughing. In fact, he was slowly stepping back toward the exit, as if retreating could rewind the moment. But Evelyn didn't watch him go. She had already turned to the rest of the room. Silence isn't protection anymore. If you knew what he was and did nothing, your name's on this too. Her words didn't echo. They clung. They wrapped around each officer like a second uniform, heavier than Kevlar. And that was just the beginning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the station lobby, now awkwardly silent in the aftermath of what had just unfolded. Officer Darren Cole, still breathing heavily, stood over the woman he had just struck. But Olivia Reed did not cry out. She did not collapse. She simply stood back up, slow and unwavering, one hand grazing the fresh welt on her cheek as her eyes bore into him with a calm that unsettled everyone watching. That silence didn't last long. From the far end of the corridor, sharp footsteps approached, quick and deliberate. A tall woman in a charcoal gray suit stepped into view, followed closely by a man with a badge hanging from a chain around his neck. The woman's presence shifted the room immediately. Her name was Elise Warren, and her authority was not up for debate. Where is she? Elise asked, without slowing her stride. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on Olivia. Ms. Reed, she said, voice clear and resonant. We've been looking for you. Darren blinked, confusion creeping into his expression. Who the hell are you? He snapped, stepping in between them. The male agent moved faster than anyone expected, flashing his credentials. Federal Oversight and Compliance Division. Step aside, officer. Elise gently guided Olivia away from the center of the room. The bruise on Olivia's face was unmistakable now. Elise turned back to the watching officers. Effective immediately, she announced. This station is under federal review. Murmurs erupted. A few officers exchanged glances. Others began pulling out their phones, texting, checking. But it was Darren's face that changed the most. His eyes darting from Elise to Olivia, from the badge to the bruise. Hold on, he growled. She assaulted my authority. She came in here demanding. She walked in, Elise interrupted, on her own 2 feet, under her own name, a name you didn't bother to check, a name that carries more weight than anyone in this room seemed to realize. Darren's eyes narrowed. Who is she? Olivia turned, finally speaking for herself. Her voice was low, but firm, each word weighted with quiet precision. My name is Olivia Reed. I am the newly appointed Civilian Oversight Commissioner for this precinct and the 4 surrounding districts. My jurisdiction begins today. The room fell still. Elise stepped forward, her tone clipped and official. The Department of Justice appointed her 3 weeks ago following multiple community complaints, use of force violations, and internal leaks from this department. Ms. Reed is here to initiate a full audit, starting with the review of officer conduct, complaints, and disciplinary records. Darren tried to recover his footing. She never identified herself. You never asked, Olivia replied. You saw a black woman standing her ground and assumed the worst. And now, officer, you've made yourself Exhibit A. Gasps fluttered around the room like sudden gusts of wind. One of the younger officers near the back took a cautious step forward. Ma'am, Commissioner Reed, are you all right? Olivia turned toward him and nodded once. I'm bruised, she said, but I'm not broken. And I didn't come here for apologies. She paused. Her gaze swept across the room, catching every officer who tried to look away. I came for accountability. From that moment on, the atmosphere inside the station changed. Federal agents fanned out, issuing sealed documents, ordering officers to remain on premises, securing computer terminals and internal logs. No one raised their voice. No one resisted. Darren tried to hover near the entrance, as if plotting an escape, but was quickly flanked by 2 federal agents. You'll remain in the building until further notice, one of them said flatly. Hand over your weapon. He looked like he might object, but Elise stepped in, her tone brooking no argument. You've lost the right to authority, Deputy Cole. If you can't act with restraint, you don't get to wear the badge. Darren unholstered his firearm and handed it over, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Meanwhile, Olivia sat in a small conference room near the back of the station, being examined by a medical officer and documenting the incident. Her fingers were steady as she signed the report, her voice unshaken as she gave her statement. She had waited years for this kind of moment, not revenge, but reckoning, and it was only just beginning. When Elise returned to check on her, Olivia simply asked, Do we have the records? We do. Internal logs, complaints, officer files, body cam audits. We're pulling everything. Olivia nodded. Then we start now. I want a full personnel history on Darren Cole and a background trace on every complaint that didn't make it past internal review. Elise gave a small smile. Already queued up. And Olivia? Yes? That was the single most composed power move I've ever witnessed. Olivia didn't smile. Her eyes stayed fixed on the hallway. Power doesn't come from shouting, she said. It comes from knowing who you are and letting the truth do the rest. And in that building, a place where silence had too often replaced justice, the truth had finally arrived. In the form of a woman they didn't see coming, and a name they would never forget. The precinct, once known for its tight grip and blue wall silence, now trembled under a scrutiny it had never imagined. The blow that Officer Brent Malloy delivered to Eleanor Fields was no longer just a personal act of violence. It had become a symbol. It ignited a storm that rumbled through every hallway, file drawer, an unread complaint the department had tucked away for years. And now, for the first time, the building that once silenced voices was about to be forced to listen. The Department of Internal Oversight set up shop inside the precinct's old conference room. The table was cleared of coffee mugs and Officer of the Month plaques. In their place, voice recorders, files stacked a foot high, and a rolling whiteboard already filling with names, dates, and arrows drawn in bold red. The mood was tense. Some officers stood straighter, hoping their posture might absolve them. Others disappeared on sudden leave or clung to desk duty, their loyalty to silence starting to look like guilt. Eleanor Fields didn't come storming in with a team of lawyers. She came in alone, dressed not in the power suits of her past, but in a charcoal sweater and soft boots, still nursing the fading bruise on her cheek. But her presence struck harder than any court summons. When she walked into the room, even the most arrogant officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They didn't expect her to return, let alone lead the investigation. It wasn't her title that shook them. It was her calm. That unnerving steadiness that said, "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for the truth." Captain Roland Green, newly assigned to assist the oversight effort, was one of the few who welcomed her. A man in his late 50s, with a clean record and tired eyes, Green had spent his career skimming along the edge of reform, never quite brave enough to push. But watching what happened to Eleanor, and what she chose to do afterward, woke something in him, a sense of unfinished duty. "You sure you want to take point on this?" he asked quietly as they prepared to brief the staff. Eleanor looked at him. "I didn't come this far to stop at the door." By the end of the week, 15 officers had been called in for questioning. Malloy had already been placed on administrative leave pending charges, but his file was just the surface. Beneath it, like rot under paint, lay a system held together by erasures, quiet threats, and a chain of command that bent justice until it broke. Officer Shauna Bryce confessed to being told to tweak incident reports if the suspect looked like trouble. Code for black, poor, or angry. Detective Lyles admitted he'd been pressured to avoid filing misconduct complaints because they'd just vanish anyway. A rookie, Officer Malik Johansson, broke down after describing a training session where senior officers mocked citizens behind closed doors and called it cop bonding. None of these confessions were new to Eleanor. What startled her wasn't the content. It was the weight they carried now. Now, people were listening. Now, it mattered. The media picked up the story. At first, it was a local headline buried under sports scores. But then came the footage. Leaked body cam stills. A snippet of Brent Malloy's voice saying, "She needs to be taught a lesson." A photo of Eleanor's bruised cheek. The news exploded. Oversight commissioner assaulted by officer during routine processing. Was it misidentification or something worse? The headlines didn't always get it right, but the attention was real. Community groups held vigils outside the precinct. A mural appeared overnight on the wall across from the building. Eleanor's silhouette against a backdrop of protest signs and courthouse steps. People brought candles, messages of support, and even cookies for the night shift. Some officers scoffed. Others stared out the window longer than they used to. Then came the town hearing. Held in a public auditorium near downtown, the hearing drew standing room only. Green sat beside Eleanor at the front, both of them facing an audience of civilians, city officials, press, and off-duty cops scattered in the back rows. Testimonies were given not by attorneys, but by everyday people. A young mother spoke about being pulled over 4 times in 3 months, with her toddler in the back seat. A retired teacher recalled how his nephew was wrongfully arrested, only to have charges dropped quietly with no apology. A delivery driver described being slammed against his own truck because he looked nervous. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't cry, but her fingers curled tighter in her lap with every word. This wasn't just oversight. This was a reckoning. When it was her turn to speak, the room went silent. Not a phone buzzed, not a pen scratched. "I came here as a citizen, and I was treated like a threat," she began. "Not because of what I did, but because of who someone thought I was. And what happened to me didn't start with a punch. It started with a culture that made that punch feel normal." She let the words sink in before continuing. "I'm not here to dismantle good policing. I'm here to expose broken systems. The truth doesn't destroy. It rebuilds, but only if we let it." By the end of the hearing, several officers from the back stood up, not to argue, but to approach her. One shook her hand. Another whispered, "Thank you." And perhaps most importantly, an internal email leaked later that week revealed that 5 officers had requested transfers to the oversight unit. Quietly, but intentionally. Captain Green caught up with her the next day. "You didn't just shake the department," he said. "You gave it a new spine." Eleanor smiled faintly, the kind that knew the road was long, but worth walking. "Spines are good," she replied, "but let's see if it grows a heart too." What began as an assault in a quiet precinct lobby had now turned into a public investigation, a community rallying cry, and a department staring into the mirror for the first time in decades. But Eleanor knew this wasn't the end. It was only the start of what came next. A battle not for attention, but for real accountability. And the weight of that truth was just beginning to settle. The air inside the precinct felt different now. Not lighter, never that, but taut, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was coming. Everyone could feel it. The shift, the edge, the quiet before something broke. Eleanor Fields walked those halls with a silence of her own, one that didn't announce power, but radiated it. Not because she wanted to be feared, but because the truth she carried could no longer be ignored. By now, the oversight inquiry had moved beyond testimony. It was entering the stage no one could hide from. Evidence. Files once sealed were now unlocked. Logs that had gone missing were recovered. An entire network of internal email records was subpoenaed, and what emerged wasn't just negligence, it was rot. Systemic, deliberate, and protected by decades of silence. What disturbed Eleanor most wasn't just the misconduct, it was how normalized it had become. Reports where excessive force was labeled minor deterrence. Arrests labeled routine, despite lacking any probable cause. Body cam footage where audio had been muted just long enough for brutality to occur again and again. Captain Roland Green delivered a confidential folder to Eleanor one morning. "This came from an anonymous drop," he said, jaw tight. "You need to see it." Inside were photos, time-stamped, clear. A storage room in the precinct basement used unofficially to destroy evidence. Shredded documents, unlogged inventory, a small camera tucked in the corner, the one that had captured it all. Green watched her absorb it. "They called it the locker room," he muttered, "where inconvenient truths go to die." Eleanor didn't respond. She didn't have to. The next morning, a team of federal agents arrived with search warrants. They found the room exactly as the photos had shown, only now with the shredder still warm. The story broke within hours. What had started as an internal review was now a full-blown federal investigation. And it wasn't just the precinct paying attention anymore. State officials, civil rights leaders, and national media outlets began descending on the city. A firestorm of questions flooded City Hall. The mayor, once hesitant to support Eleanor publicly, now had no choice. This is not just about one incident, he admitted in a press briefing. It's about a culture that we failed to confront. But while the city tried to manage optics, Eleanor focused on people. She made time for every civilian who had filed a complaint in the last 10 years. Many of them never expected a callback, let alone a meeting. Some walked in with anger, others with tears, most with stories that were far too familiar. Like the mother whose teenage son was stopped and frisked 6 times in 2 months, always near the same gas station. Or the elderly man who had once dared to ask for a badge number and ended up in a holding cell overnight. Eleanor listened to them all, not because it looked good, but because it mattered. And in those conversations, something began to happen. The public's fear, once justified and entrenched, began to crack. Not completely, but enough for people to come forward, to speak names out loud, to say, "This happened to me too." Inside the precinct, the division between officers grew sharper. Some leaned in, tentatively at first, then openly, joining the reform effort, attending cultural training sessions, volunteering for civilian panels. Others resisted with everything they had. They claimed Eleanor's presence was political, performative, anti-cop. But the louder they complained, the more isolated they became. And then came the moment no one could prepare for. Brent Malloy, the officer who had started all of this with one brutal punch, walked into the precinct unannounced. Not in uniform. Just jeans, a windbreaker, and the weight of a man who thought he could intimidate his way back into relevance. He asked for his desk keys, said he had personal effects to collect. The request wasn't illegal, but the timing was intentional. Eleanor happened to be walking down the main corridor when their paths crossed. Time seemed to bend around them. Officers froze. Phones stopped ringing. Malloy sneered, not with defiance, but something colder. "Still playing Queen of the Castle?" he muttered under his breath. Eleanor didn't break stride. "No," she said quietly. "Just cleaning up the mess you left behind." Malloy laughed, but it was hollow. His confidence, once weaponized so easily, no longer carried weight, especially not with agents now shadowing him down the hall. The moment passed, but the station remained silent long after he was escorted out. That night, Eleanor called an emergency staff briefing. No scripts, no charts, just her voice and the truth. "Some of you think this ends with discipline," she said, "but it won't. Because what we're dealing with isn't just bad policy, it's bad memory. This department forgot who it was supposed to serve, forgot how to see people who didn't look like you, think like you, speak like you. And if we don't fix that, everything else falls apart." She paused, not to let the words settle, but to give space for what came next. "If you're here to rebuild, I'll walk beside you. If you're here to protect what's broken, I won't." Silence. Then slowly, a hand raised. Officer Johansson, the young man who once cried during his own interview. I want to stay, he said. I want to help. Another followed, then another. That night, the tide shifted. Not because Malloy had been removed, but because the department, finally, was choosing to confront its reflection. Eleanor stood in her office alone later that evening. She looked out the window toward the courthouse across the street, its marble steps glistening from a passing rain. In her hands was a file, not Malloy's, not Green's, her own. She opened it, a note she had written months before, a reminder to herself, they will try to make you small, but your truth is not. She closed it again. The tipping point had arrived, not with headlines or outrage, but with truth that refused to stay buried. Tomorrow would demand more. But tonight, Eleanor knew one thing with certainty. This time, the system was the one being watched, and it was finally being held accountable. The morning after Brent Malloy's official indictment, the precinct stood still. Not in protest, but in reckoning. The blue lights still flashed outside. The badges were still worn. But something fundamental had changed. The silence that once protected bad actors now revealed their shadows. And in that light, a new story was being written. Eleanor Fields stood in the heart of it, not as a symbol of revenge, but as a steady voice that refused to be silenced. Inside what had once been the precinct's main interrogation room, the atmosphere was different. It had been transformed into a review hub. The walls were stripped of intimidation. In their place hung hand-drawn posters from neighborhood kids, messages of hope, peace, accountability. One drawing showed a black woman with a cape made of legal documents. No one asked who it was meant to be. Eleanor walked those halls quietly. She didn't need a podium or applause. Her work was deliberate, methodical. The review process she launched with Captain Green had turned into something deeper, a cultural detox. Veteran officers who once scoffed at her presence now kept folders close and words measured. Younger ones watched her closely, seeing in her not just oversight, but possibility. She never talked about legacy, but others did. News outlets wanted interviews. Advocacy groups wanted keynote addresses. But Eleanor turned them down. Not because she didn't care, but because she did. She wasn't here to go viral. She was here to make sure that what they started didn't collapse the moment the headlines moved on. One afternoon, Green approached her with something folded in his hands. It was a resignation letter from an officer who had once defended Malloy's tactics, now unable to reconcile the weight of what had been uncovered with the man he thought he was. I thought I was helping people, the letter read, but I was helping protect a system that hurt them instead. Eleanor read it in silence, then nodded. Accountability isn't always punishment, she said. Sometimes it's surrender. Across the city, word of the department's transformation spread. Community members who once walked around patrol cars now began stopping to ask questions, give suggestions, even say thank you. At one town hall, a teenager stood up and asked if he could intern with the department one day. The room paused. Green smiled. That's the first time we've heard that in a long while. At home, Eleanor moved more slowly than she used to. The bruises had faded, but the weight of what she carried hadn't. Her evenings were quiet, filled with notes, names, stories she promised she'd never let disappear again. Sometimes she lit a single candle by the window and whispered the names of those who had come before her, the ones who never got to finish the work. Then came the letter. Mailed without a return address, inside was a note. typed, but personal. I used to follow Malloy's orders without question. I was afraid. But watching you stand in that room, bleeding and still standing, it woke me up. I'm still here, and I'm learning. She folded it neatly and placed it beside her original case file. Not to archive it, but to remember. Even in broken systems, seeds of change can grow. Captain Green retired quietly 3 months later. No farewell party, just a note on Eleanor's desk and a challenge. Keep pushing. Don't let them forget. She didn't. She trained new oversight officers, helped build review protocols adopted statewide. And when the city offered her the title of commissioner full-time, she declined again. I don't need the title, she said, just the access. A year later, the precinct hosted its first community and cops event. No uniforms, no weapons, just dialogue. Eleanor stood in the back, unseen but proud, as a new generation of officers answered questions not with defensiveness, but humility. One boy, no older than 10, raised his hand and asked, "Are you good guys?" The officer paused, then answered, "We're trying. And we're being watched, like we should be." That was enough. Eleanor left quietly after that. She walked through the dusk-lit streets of Birmingham, feeling the weight of everything and everyone she'd carried. Not because it was done, but because it was working. Sometimes change doesn't roar. It flickers. It cracks. And then slowly, it builds. In the ashes of injustice, Eleanor Fields didn't just survive. She planted something that would outlive them all. Eleanor Fields walked into that police station on a rainy evening as just another black woman in the eyes of those who judged her. Within minutes, she was punched, publicly, brutally, and without justification, by Officer Brent Malloy, a man whose arrogance had gone unchecked for far too long. What no one in that room knew was that Eleanor wasn't just a bystander. She was the newly appointed federal oversight investigator assigned to the very department that thought they could humiliate her without consequence. That single act of violence ignited a chain reaction that would expose years of misconduct, corruption, and institutional rot. But more importantly, it awakened a reckoning no one saw coming. Eleanor did not seek revenge. She brought reform. She didn't scream. She didn't retaliate. She led through calm, grit, and relentless determination. She turned silence into accountability. Her presence in the precinct shattered old alliances built on fear and cover-ups. With every document reviewed, every file unsealed, every conversation she initiated, she reminded both the department and the public that justice doesn't begin with punishment. It begins with truth. She made it clear that real power isn't loud or violent. It's steady, principled, and rooted in purpose. This story, at its core, is not just about one woman standing up. It's about what happens when systems are forced to confront themselves. It's about every unseen act of bravery from those who whispered instead of shouting, who documented instead of deleting, who stayed instead of walking away. Eleanor's journey shows us that change isn't instant. It's layered, uncomfortable, and often thankless, but necessary. The legacy she left wasn't just in files and policies. It lived in the quiet nods of officers who finally spoke up, the shift in how citizens viewed their protectors, and the ripple effect that gave birth to a culture of reflection and reform. The lesson? True accountability begins when we stop waiting for permission to challenge what's broken. Whether you're in a position of power or feel like you have none, your voice, when used with integrity, can shift entire institutions. Speak up. Document truth. Protect those who risk everything for what's right. Because silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't let it end here. Help us continue to tell stories that uncover, uplift, and ignite change. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, and drop a comment below. Let's make sure stories like Eleanor's are not the exception, but the beginning of a new norm. Your support gives us the strength to keep going. And trust me, the next story might be the one that sparks the change in your own city.